So, I'll start the lecture now. The topic that was given to me was national environmental issues in Sri Lanka. So, before I go on to the issues, I think you have to know some basic things about environmental protection in Sri Lanka. So, if you look at the constitution of the country, in the constitution itself, this Article 27 of the Constitution states that the state shall protect, preserve and improve the environment for the benefit of the community. So, the importance of environmental protection is given in the Constitution itself. So, now this Article 27 actually gives the responsibility of the government or the state in protecting the environment. But if you look at Article 28, which is more important, I think, it states that the exercise and enjoyment of rights and freedoms is inseparable from the performance of duties and obligations. And accordingly, it is the duty of every person in Sri Lanka to protect nature and conserve its riches. So now Article 27 gives the responsibility of the government or the state in environmental protection, right? And Article 28 says that it's the responsibility of every citizen of Sri Lanka to protect the environment. So why I say this is important is because sometimes people seem to forget that everybody has a responsibility to protect the environment. We think it's the responsibility of somebody else, Ministry of Environment or the Central Environmental Authority or the municipality. But we don't think that it has anything to do with us. So this is why I wanted to just stress this. There is a responsibility for all of us in protecting the environment. If you look at the legislation related to environment in Sri Lanka, there's a whole number of laws in Sri Lanka which has some provisions which relate to environmental protection and management. That doesn't mean that these laws are only for environmental protection and management, but what I'm saying is even laws which are dealing with some other subject like urban development or water supply or anything like that. So in those laws also there are some provisions which relate to environmental protection and management, right? So if you really count, there are more than 100 laws with some provisions on environmental protection in Sri Lanka, right? And if you look at some of the earliest environmental legislation, it dates back to the last century during the British time. For example, the laws on forestry, then protection of high elevations like that. Those laws were brought in more than 100 years ago sometimes, right? So there are some very old laws also in Sri Lanka. But the law that deals exclusively with environmental protection, and the most comprehensive piece of legislation dealing with environmental protection exclusively is the National Environmental Act number 47 of 1980. So it's a relatively new law when you compare with other laws, the law on environmental protection in Sri Lanka. So these are some of the agencies dealing with environmental issues in Sri Lanka. Coast Conservation Department. Then we have something called the Marine Pollution Prevention Authority. I think it's they have changed the name to Marine Environmental Protection Agency now. Yeah. Then Sustainable Energy Authority, Central Environmental Authority. Then we have the Forest Department, Department of Wildlife Conservation, and also we have there's a special Environmental Authority in the Northwestern Provincial Council. So there's a Provincial Environmental Authority, only one of course. Though we have 9 provincial councils, we have one Environment Protection Authority at the provincial level, right? That is because the environment is a subject which is devolved to the provinces also. So it belongs to the central government as well as part of it is devolved to the provincial council. There is provision for the provincial councils to enact their own law. So so far only the Northwestern Provincial Council has enacted their own law on environmental protection, not any of the other provincial councils. Then when you talk about environmental protection now, especially in Sri Lanka, when you're talking about environment, most people talk about forestry and wildlife. Things like that. People think that environment is forestry and wildlife and planting trees or cleaning up the garbage. So that's what normally people relate to when you say environmental protection, right? But really, when you really look at it, there are some what we call brown issues which we don't pay much attention to in Sri Lanka because we are so focused on things like biodiversity, fauna and flora, tree planting, that kind of, they are called green issues, right? Because they are dealing with fauna and flora and trees and that kind of thing. So those are what we call the green issues. But we also have what are called the brown issues, which are issues that are related to air, water pollution, industrial pollution control, hazardous waste, that kind of thing, which are called brown issues. So most of the time in Sri Lanka, the attention has been paid onto the green issues. And it's only very recently that people are paying attention to so-called brown issues like pollution, water pollution, air pollution, hazardous waste management. So that kind of issue there is a attention on those issues only quite recently after the enactment of the National Environmental Act. So now if you look at forestry and wildlife conservation, now the two prime agencies to protect forests and wildlife is the Forest Department and the Wildlife Conservation Department. And between these two agencies, they control almost 1.9 million hectares between them. Right? So out of all the land in Sri Lanka, they are controlling almost 2 million hectares between the two agencies. Right? So you can see that when you are doing projects, most of the time there will be somebody, when they are doing large scale projects, you will always have to deal with the Forest Department or the Wildlife Department because they are controlling so much of land area in the country. 2 million hectares is a huge amount of land. So the Forest Department, the main function of the Forest Department is of course to conserve the forest, natural forest in Sri Lanka and also the biological diversity in the country. The Wildlife Department's function is to protect the indigenous fauna and flora in the country, and also they also establish things like national reserves and sanctuaries, which are protected areas under their law. So those are two main functions of the Forest Department and the Wildlife Department. Now, if you go to see the history of the Central Environmental Authority, so as I told you, the National Environmental Act is a relatively new law, right? It was only passed in 1980, whereas if you look at the Forest Ordinance and all that, they are about 100 years old. So 1980 means only about 40 years, right? Not even 40 years. It's a relatively new law, and the law was passed in 1980, the National Environmental Act, and the Central Environmental Authority was established in 1981. That is 1 year later, to with the responsibility of managing the environmental issues in Sri Lanka. So there is a national body to manage environmental issues. So at the beginning, from 1981 to 1988, the Central Environmental Authority was only what we call a coordinating and policy making body. It has really no regulatory authority, right? And they found that the law was very ineffective without any regulatory powers. So in 1988, they made some amendments to the National Environmental Act. Thereby, the Central Environmental Authority was transformed into what we call a regulatory agency, right? Regulatory agency means they have powers to do certain things. It's not only making policy, but you have regulatory powers. So from 1988, the Central Environmental Authority has had these regulatory powers. So now going on to the major environmental issues in Sri Lanka. So these are some of the major issues that we find in Sri Lanka. First of all, of course, in urban areas, as all of you know, municipal solid waste management is a major issue in urban areas, especially. Then coastal erosion, especially in the southwest coast, coastal erosion is a major issue. Then you also have water pollution, right? But if you look at the water pollution in Sri Lanka, now people think that the water in Sri Lanka is very polluted. It is polluted to some extent, but people think that it's highly polluted with industrial effluents. But that's not really true. It's mainly polluted from sewerage, right? So if you look at water samples in many areas in Sri Lanka, you find things like E. coli in the water. But you won't find things like very dangerous things like mercury or chromium or lead in most of the water sources, like in the rivers and the lakes, etc. So you can't say that it's highly polluted with industrial extent, but it is polluted to some extent with sewerage. Then you have also air pollution, right? Especially in urban areas. Now here also people think that the air is, how many people here think that in Colombo it's highly polluted? Do you think that it's highly polluted? How many think? How many of you think that? Nobody thinks it's polluted. No. One. I don't know whether he's putting up his hand or doing something. You think so? Okay. Who else? Who was the next? Highly polluted. How many more? Others don't think that it's polluted. Why? Huh? You are right. What else? Colombo. Why do you think that it's highly polluted? Yeah. Huh? Vehicles, yeah. Yeah.
And also a lot of construction was happening and the PM2 that's why
yeah. Yeah.
That level has gone up in the recent past. It's quite high right now.
Very high, actually. So what all of you are saying is correct. It's changed. Now we say it's not polluted. Both of you are saying it's polluted, but what you said is correct. Right? This particulate matter is very high. That is true. So it has gone beyond what the WHO has recommended several times. So the WHO normally recommends the amount of particulate matter that should be in the ambient air. Right? Now if you take the air quality in Colombo, the particulate matter or the dust levels are very high. That is true. So it is polluted, as you say, right? But now what he is saying is it's not polluted. It is polluted from dust, that is through particulate matter. But the other things like now normally what you call pollution is sulfur dioxide or oxides of nitrogen, carbon monoxide. Now those are the generally what we call pollutants. But if you look at the levels of those are still within the standards. There may be 1 or 2 days when the sulfur dioxide level goes up, but not very. I mean, if you compare with other countries in the region like India or even Bangkok and all, those levels are not very high. The levels of pollutants like sulfur dioxide. But as you say, the particulate matter level is very high. So I mean, you can't say it's not polluted, it is polluted, right? So that's the situation in Sri Lanka. But as he says, because it's a coastal area, I think all the things get swept out into the sea. So this is why we are kind of lucky. So we don't have very high pollution levels, but it is polluted to some extent. with particulate matter. And also it's mainly from vehicle emissions, more than even construction and all that. It's vehicle emissions that is causing the pollution. Now in other countries, air pollution is mostly caused by power generation, thermal power plants, uh, and industries, right? So since we don't have so many industries and also thermal power plants, our pollution is mainly from the vehicles, and the number of vehicles are increasing every day. So you can see that the pollution levels are going up. Then of course the other issue that we have is hazardous waste management, right? Now even though now if you look at Sri Lanka as a whole, we are not a highly industrialized country. So normally hazardous waste is a huge problem in highly industrialized countries, right? Like if you look at Germany or USA, they generate millions of tons of hazardous waste. So we don't have so many industries. That we do have a few, but we don't have a huge quantity of hazardous waste. But the fact is, the little that we produce is not being properly taken care of. So because of that, we do have a problem of hazardous waste management. Then if you look at the hospital waste, even hospital waste is considered to be a hazardous waste, right? Now when you talk about hazardous waste, you normally think of very toxic waste like waste containing mercury or cyanide or something like that. But in Sri Lanka, now there is a regulation on hazardous waste, and in that regulation, even hospital waste is included there, right? So why is hospital waste included in the hazardous waste? Why should we include the hospital waste as a hazardous waste? Huh? Because it's kind of infectious waste, and there are a lot of bacteria and infections can occur. And also there are things like needles in the hospital waste, right, which can cause very serious things. So hospital waste is also classified as a hazardous waste in Sri Lanka, and you find that most of the hospitals don't deal with their hazardous waste properly. So till very recently, most of the hospitals were just throwing their hazardous waste like needles and even contaminated waste and even body parts. They put with the municipal waste, mixed with the general waste, right? So it's only now recently that they have started to deal with this waste, and there's a company that takes the hospital waste and incinerates the waste, right? So you find that is why hazardous waste is a problem in Sri Lanka, because you don't deal with it properly, not because there are huge quantities, but because of the bad way of dealing with it. Actually, you don't deal with it at all in a way, because you are just throwing it with the other waste. Even industries, most industries, they just throw their hazardous waste with the normal waste. So that is why hazardous waste is a problem in Sri Lanka. Then the other problem, of course, is inappropriate siting of industries. That is also a problem, right? If anyone of you are living in Modoto Ratmalana or in the Irikala Jayala side, you can see there are so many industries next to highly residential areas, right? If you live in Ratmalana, you can see asbestos industry right next to a lot of residential houses. Now, you will never find that in any other country, because asbestos is a known cancer-causing agent, right? And you can't really have asbestos industry right next to residential areas. Of course, what happened was in the past, maybe about 50, 60 years ago, when they had an industrial zone in Ratmalana, right? The government created the industrial area in Ratmalana. So there were many industries that came into Ratmalana at that time. But after that, since then, so many residential areas have developed around those industries, right? And at that time, there were no laws like the National Environmental Act or UDL, or there were no laws like that at all, right? So because of that, industries and residential areas are just close by, in close proximity to each other, which is not at all a very good thing. And you get very hazardous industries in Nagpur, like asbestos industry, battery industries, textile industries. So inappropriate siting of industries. It is applicable. But the problem is now, as you say, those industries came earlier, right? Before the law came. So when the law came in 1980, those industries are already operating. So in a way, you can't suddenly bring in a law overnight and say you have to meet these standards and regulations by tomorrow. You can't say that, it's not fair really. Because they came about 30 years ago and they were sitting there for years on end. And suddenly you can't say you can't work here, you just have to get out of here. That's the problem really. But now, of course, people don't, now there are many laws now, now there are regulations on industrial siting, right? Before you establish an industry, you have to get Central Environmental Authority clearance. In some large-scale industries, you have to do environmental impact assessment, right? So there is now safeguards in place now. So now you won't find a situation like what is happening happening now, most of the time. Unless something goes wrong somewhere or some political interference or something like that. You won't find that kind of situation happening. But unfortunately, as you say, these laws, they do apply, but those industries have been given a grace period, They have been given time to meet those standards, etc. You can't tell you have to meet the standards for they just can't. It's not practical to do that. So that is one issue. Then the human-elephant conflict. I'm sure you all must be seeing this every day in the papers, that either elephant is dying or the man is dead because of an elephant. So this is what we call the human-elephant conflict. And what is the cause of the human-elephant conflict? Yeah, deforestation. And deforestation due to development. Because we are developing very fast. And we are intruding into the areas where elephants they are in the, now if you look at Hambatota is a classic example, right? There are huge developments coming up. Now there's a lot of elephant population in Hambatota, right? But now we also have huge developments like the airport, port, and so many other developments coming up in Hambatota. So what you find is that the elephant side, the area where they can roam about is decreasing every day. And people are coming into areas where elephants used to be there. And then, of course, the elephant doesn't know all this, and elephants don't change there. They have their elephant corridors where they always go. So if you build a building in the middle of an elephant corridor, the elephant will continue to go on that path. He doesn't know now there's a house there, you can't go there. He's an animal, he's not so intelligent, so that is how this human-elephant conflict happens. Because people are intruding into their area where elephants used to be living. Then the other major problem is soil erosion, especially in the upcountry areas. Soil erosion is a very serious issue in Sri Lanka. And of course, deforestation. So these are the major environmental issues in Sri Lanka. Now, if you take municipal solid waste management, it's a major issue in urban areas, right? So now, if you look at Colombo, in Colombo, of course, you have to say that the situation has improved quite a lot because at least they are collecting the waste regularly in most of the areas. I don't know what areas. In most of the areas, they come twice or thrice a week to collect the garbage and go, right? But there's a serious issue on where to dispose of this waste. So that's always a major issue in Sri Lanka. You all would have heard about that Meethotamulla. There was a tragedy, where that mountain of waste came down and about 25 people were killed in Meethotamulla, Corona, some time back, about maybe 1 or 2 years ago. So what happened there was, now the municipality was collecting the waste from Colombo and they were dumping it in Meethotamulla. And when you dump a huge quantity, about 700-800 tons a day of waste in one location, what will happen? You will naturally get a huge mountain of waste. And there were people living around that Meethotamulla dump, right? And at some point, that dump just collapsed because it went up, it goes up. We are engineers, so you know when it goes up to certain height, I mean, I don't know what the reason is, but anyway, the dump collapsed on the people, right? So this is actually a major issue in Sri Lanka, that we don't have proper disposal sites for waste. Now, if you go to a more developed country like, for example, of course, USA, or no, you don't have to go there. You can go to Japan or even Korea or Singapore. You don't see these huge mountains of waste anywhere, because they have what are called sanitary landfill sites, right? And if you go to one of those sanitary landfill sites where they dispose of waste, you think that you are in a park or something, right? Because they don't have these mountains of exposed waste anywhere, right? They come and dump the waste in one place. Then they, what do you call it, compress the waste every day. And they cover the waste with soil every day, right? So there is no odor coming from them, from the waste. There are no animals who are, picking at the waste like in Sri Lanka. We have seen dogs and cats and crows, they come and pick at the waste. But in a more developed country, you don't see that, because they have proper sanitary landfill sites. Right? Now, in Sri Lanka, we don't really have any proper landfill sites. So we have just waste dumps only. And so far, there is only one sanitary landfill site in Sri Lanka, which is in Dompe, in Gappa area. Right? So that was actually built with Korean assistance. Because in Korea, they have sanitary landfill site for their waste, and they built this sanitary landfill site for us in Dompe. But the problem there is, the people in Dompe don't want the waste from Colombo to go to their sanitary landfill site. So that is the problem, right? So now what the government is trying to do is, they are trying to develop a sanitary landfill site in Puttlam, in Aruvakkadu. A place called Aruvakkadu in Puttlam. And they are trying to take the waste from Colombo to Puttlam. But there also you find that the people in Puttlam are now protesting that the waste from Colombo is trying to be brought to their area. They don't like that. So this is actually a major issue in Sri Lanka, because you can't find a proper waste disposal site anywhere in the island. The people always protest. They don't want waste, naturally, because they have never seen a sanitary landfill site, right? They have only seen this waste dumped in Sri Lanka. So naturally, you and I, we also would like to, if you think that there's a waste dump going to be established next to your house, who's going to like that? Nobody likes that. So this is why it's very difficult to establish a sanitary landfill site in Sri Lanka, because of the people's protest. So every time the government tries to establish a landfill site like that, there are protests, and then the politicians get involved. And of course the MPs of the area don't like, they are scared of the people. So most of the time these projects never succeed. So that is one of the issues, major issues that we have in Sri Lanka, is that you can't find a proper disposal site for the waste. Even though the waste is collected regularly. Now in Colombo, generally the waste is to be collected properly, right? They come and take the waste. But the disposal is always an issue. In Colombo, final disposal of waste is causing a major social and political issue, right? Is what I say. And all existing disposal sites are dumps, as opposed to sanitary landfill sites, which you find in other countries. So this is the problem in municipal solid waste management. So this is what I told, the very first sanitary landfill site not will be opened, it's already open now, you don't pay. So this was actually implemented by the Central Environmental Authority. They had a project called Provincial project, which was dealing with waste, and they are the ones who established this sanitary landfill site in Dompe with Korean funds and assistance, technical assistance also. So under this Provincial project, actually the CEA has been assisting a lot of local authorities like Pradesh Sabhas and municipal council on how to deal with their waste, right? So actually they have been assisted many of the local authorities have been assisted to make compost out of the waste. Because if you look at the waste in Sri Lanka, most of it is biodegradable waste, right? Whereas if you look at the waste in a more developed country, you find most of the waste is like plastics and paper. In Sri Lanka, you still find that most of the large quantity of waste is still biodegradable, compostable waste like leaves and kitchen waste, etc. So which can easily be made into compost. So actually the Vilisasa project which was implemented by the Central Environmental Authority, they have actually set up a lot of composting plants in actually more than about 100 local authorities around Sri Lanka. In hazardous waste management, I told you that this is also an issue in Sri Lanka. Here also, it's the disposal that is a problem. And why is disposal a problem? Because now, when you are dealing with hazardous waste, you can't just simply go and dump it in a landfill site, because that waste is very toxic, right? So before you go and dispose of hazardous waste, you have to make sure that waste is made into a harmless material. You have to treat that waste, right? But in Sri Lanka, this is the problem because we don't have hazardous waste treatment facility. In many other countries, like highly developed countries, there are agencies or private sector entities that will treat the hazardous waste. Right? They treat it so that they make it into a harmless material. So we don't have that in Sri Lanka. So which is why hazardous waste is becoming a major issue in Sri Lanka because we don't have a treatment facility or a disposal facility. So you find that most of the time people who are generating hazardous waste just dump it somewhere or just give it to some contractor to take it away. The contractor doesn't know the waste is hazardous, no? He just goes and dumps it somewhere. So there are many cases where there was a case where one industry, they were generating some hazardous waste and they were giving it to some contractor and he was just going and dumping it into his own land. I mean, he didn't know it was so hazardous, but he dumped it on his own land and no one was worried about it. And then after some time what happened was the wells in the neighboring lands, people are using wells in that area, somewhere in Moronite. They found that the water in their wells are getting polluted because now the land next to their wells is full of hazardous waste. And that waste was seeping into the groundwater. Right? So till that happened, no one knew that this man was dumping hazardous waste. And then of course he had to pay compensation and the company had to pay really. Because whatever it is, the company can't just give it to a contractor and say, this is not our responsibility. They are responsible for that. Finally, the industry who is generating the waste is responsible. Just because he gave it to a contractor doesn't mean that his responsibility is gone, right? Finally, he is responsible. So the company actually had to pay and also they have to provide the water supply scheme for those residents. Now, similar thing happened in Ratupasala. You all must have heard, no? There was an industry operating in Ratupasala, which was generating waste. And the people are complaining that their wells were getting polluted, right? But in that case, of course, there was no proof that it was the industry that was making these wells polluted. Because they found that the water in that area is naturally acidic. Because the soil is like peat, acidic soil. So because of that, the water is also acidic naturally, not because of the industry. But it blew up into a huge political thing. I don't know whether you all remember, it was about 4 or 5 years ago. There was some man killed also after this Ratupasala incident, right? So this is why we say that hazardous waste has to be dealt with very carefully because it can affect the water, groundwater and surface water, etc. So you have to deal, and it can cause soil pollution. And it's not easy to deal with hazardous waste pollution because once the groundwater gets polluted, it's near impossible to clean it. Now I can give you an example in the United States. Now I mean we think that the US is so highly developed. It is a highly developed country. But at one time they also did not take, before the 1970s, they also did not have proper laws in place to deal with hazardous waste, right? And of course their country was developing. I mean it's a highly industrialized country, in the US, and their industries. I mean they were dealing with waste, radioactive waste with heavy metals, etc. And there were no laws, proper laws in place to control them, right? And you still find that in the United States alone, there are more than 1,000 sites, which are so polluted with industrial waste that the government, US government, had to create a fund called a super fund, right? It's amounted to billions of US dollars, right? Just to clean up all these sites that had been polluted by the industries. So fortunately in Sri Lanka we are not, I mean in the first place we are not highly industrialized. Of course in our case also there are instances where industries are causing pollution, but you don't find it in a very widespread way. So we are lucky that way. And now of course there are laws in place. And I don't know if they all have heard in Japan, which is also a highly developed country now, right? But during the time it was after the war, when they were developing very fast and industrializing very fast, there is a famous case called the Minamata incident in Japan. Right? It's a famous case where there was an industry that was using mercury in their process. They were using mercury in the process and they were discharging their wastewater. I mean, at that time there were no laws in Japan. Right? So they were just disposing of their industrial wastewater into the Minamata Bay. Right? And in this Minamata Bay, there's a lot of fishing going on. There were a lot of fish, and people are catching the fish in Minamata Bay. And what happens with mercury is that mercury is a metal that just builds up in your body. Like once you take mercury into your body, it just keeps on building up. Right? The mercury doesn't go out of the body. So it keeps accumulating in the body, and you found that this industry was discharging mercury laden wastewater into the Minamata Bay, and the fish in the bay were accumulating this mercury in their body. Then the people in that area were eating the fish a lot because it was a fishing area. And you found that thousands of people are affected by mercury poisoning. Right? And mercury poisoning is a very serious kind of poisoning which affects the central nervous system and the brain. Right? So we found that a lot of people died also. And I think worse than dying were people who were suffering from mercury poisoning. It is really a terrible kind of thing to suffer from mercury poisoning because you are like totally your brain doesn't work, your central nervous system is affected. And even babies in the next generation were affected by this mercury poisoning. And even now, today, that company is still paying compensation to those families who are affected by this mercury poison. So you can see how dangerous this hazardous waste is if you don't deal with it properly. Right? So this is why many countries have very strict laws on hazardous waste management. Because it can cause a lot of problems in humans. And as I told you, hospital waste is also part of hazardous waste, right? And the majority of hospitals in Sri Lanka, except I think the hospitals in Colombo, which have some kind of method of dealing with the health, because they separate the hazardous waste. You know, they have separate bins for the needles, separate bins for contaminated waste, then body parts. So you have to actually deal with them separately. Right? And the best way of dealing with hospital waste is to incinerate it at a very high temperature. So that is the best way of dealing with hazardous waste. And it's only now recently that there is a company that is doing this incineration for hazardous waste. Right? So the hospitals in Colombo are dealing with their waste to some extent. But if you go to outstation hospital, you still find that they'll be probably burying the body parts or something. They have to do something with it. No, you can't just leave it there. No? So after operations, they just take those body parts and just bury it on the ground. That's what a lot of hospitals do outstation. So it's not a very acceptable situation as far as hazardous waste is concerned in Sri Lanka. Then the third one I was telling you is about the inappropriate siting of industry. So this is also, when you site an industry in an inappropriate place, it can result in a lot of pollution problems and also nuisance to other people. Sri Lanka, what you find is this pollution problems and nuisances are caused by small scale industries like cottage industries, right? Because suddenly you will find that people will start an industry in their house, a small chili grinding mill or making some food or something like that. So you find that a small house in a housing estate, they start a small industry, right? And when that industry develops, they expand the industry in that house itself. Of course, these are all mostly unauthorized industries, right? So one has given them approval to do it, but they are just doing it in a house. Then what happens is, it causes a huge nuisance to the neighbors, right? Because they are grinding these mills and there's a lot of noise and vibration, etc. And it disturbs your neighbors. So that kind of pollution, there's a lot of that in Sri Lanka. So this is mainly due to the what we call the inappropriate siting of industries. But if you look at the bigger industries in Sri Lanka, they normally go through these approval processes where they get the approval from the local authority, municipality or the Pradesh Sabha. They get approval from Central Environmental Authority. They get UD approval. So they get all those approvals, the bigger industries, right? And when you get those approvals, normally those agencies will see whether that site is suitable for establishment of an industry. So they will look and see whether there are residential areas around it, etc. So all those factors will be looked at before approval is given. So usually in Sri Lanka, most of these pollution and nuisance problems are caused by small scale cottage industries, which are most of the time unauthorized and not by the large scale industries. So this is one of the other major issues in Sri Lanka. So then there is also a government policy that high polluting industries should be sited within industrial, what we call industrial estates, right? Now you already have seen those of the industrial, we have a number of industrial estates in Sri Lanka. The problem is that we don't have sufficient industrial estates to house all these industries. So that is why there are industries outside industrial estate, even high polluting industries you find outside industrial estate. The thing about having an industry within an industrial estate is then the pollution can be contained within that industrial zone. Because there are no residential areas, etc. around it. So you can control that within the industrial estate, right? And the pollution doesn't go out and create a problem for the residents. But unfortunately, we don't have enough industrial estates to house all the industries that we have. So this is why we can't properly site these industries. And even some of the industrial, we have a lot of BOI zones, right? The Board of Investment, they have a lot of what we call it, EPZ and industrial zones, right? But you find that many of those industrial zones, for an industry to be operating properly, the industrial estate should have what? What are the things that industrial estate should have? If it's a proper industrial estate. What are the infrastructure facilities you need for an industry to operate? Huh? Huh? Roads, yes. Roads, definitely you need roads. What else? Huh? Can't hear you. Can't hear you.
Treatments.
Yes, that's a very important treatment facility. You need treatment facilities, no? Then you need the water for the industries to operate. Now, many times you find that there are industrial estates in Sri Lanka with no water. So, what is the reason for that? Because now sometimes a politician comes and he says, I want industrial estate here. I have seen it happening so many times, right? He says, I want industrial estate in my area. So now the officials concerned, the government officials, they are too scared to tell him that, to have an industrial estate, you need basic infrastructure. Like one of the basic things is water for industries. Naturally, you need water for industry. There is no water anywhere inside. But still for all, you put an industrial estate there because the minister wanted it. And after you put the industrial estate, you find that there is no water. And how can industries function without water? Right? Then as you said, the important thing is of course wastewater treatment facilities. Right? Now, if you look at the many of the BOI zones, they have waste treatment facilities. Right? So then the industries, now if there are 25 industries, all those industries can dispose of their wastewater into the one treatment plant. They have one treatment plant. Of course, they can pay for it, pay for treatment, but then it's very easy for those 25 industries to operate there. No? There will be one person in charge who will look after the wastewater treatment. So that is what we call by infrastructure. But you need the infrastructure for the industries to operate. Wastewater treatment facilities, telecommunications, roads, electricity, right? All those things are necessary for industry to operate properly, right? So many of these things are missing in some of the industrial estates that we find in Sri Lanka. Because they are just blindly going and establishing industrial estates in areas where you just can't, the industry just can't function. Now the classic example is Hambantota. Now there are huge industries trying to come to Hambantota. There are Chinese investors, I don't know how many acres they are being given, 15,000 hectares or acres or something like that, they are going to be given. Now where is all this, where is the water for all these industries coming from? There is no water in Hambantota, even sometimes there are no water in Hambantota for people to drink. But they are talking about these huge, massive industries which are going to use huge quantities of water. So where is the water going to come from? Nobody knows. Yeah, seawater, but it's very, very expensive. When you're having industries, to think of desalination and all, it is expensive. I don't know, from what I know, it's relatively expensive. I don't know. Yeah, desert countries have a lot of money, no? They have a lot of oil and they have a lot of money. So they can desalinate and do all those things. But most of yeah, maybe. Yes, but I mean for a country like Sri Lanka, I don't know. But actually they were thinking of desalination also. And now they are thinking of diverting Ginganga and Nirvalaga to provide water to Hambantota. But this should have been thought much earlier, no? I mean, you can't establish the industrial estate or you can't establish the port and the airport and then think about where is the water coming from. They should have first diverted the water to Hambantota and then thought about the airport and the port. You don't establish a port costing billions of rupees and then sit there thinking where is the water going to come from. So this is the situation in Sri Lanka. Our planning is so bad actually. I mean, it's really, there is a lot of, we don't plan our projects properly. So you can see bad planning in many of these projects. I don't know how many of you are in the government service, but how many are in Anyone in the government service, government agencies? No, all in the private sector. Nobody in the government. That's, I don't know whether it's good or bad, but I know in the government sector the planning is really bad because they plan these huge projects where they don't. I mean, Hambantota is the classic example where the port is functioning, they don't have water. So where is this now the port city in Colombo? Look at the port city in Colombo. Where is the water going to come from? I don't know. Can the water supply board, National Water Supply and Drainage Board? Now, a port city will be like another Colombo next to Colombo, right? You can imagine the population there and the buildings coming up, apartments coming up. Even now in Colombo, the apartments are coming up like in mushrooms everywhere. Where is this water going to come from? Has anybody thought about now? People are talking about this port city as if this construction is going to be the biggest environmental. It is an environmental issue, all right? The construction of the port city. There are major environmental issues, but they are actually the biggest environmental issue is going to come once the port city comes up. And where is the water going to come from? Where is the wastewater? Where is the wastewater going in? Who's going to treat it? That is going to be the biggest problem when this port city comes up. People are just talking about coastal erosion and it looks ugly, all right, and the sand and the rocks that have been, amount of natural resources that have been used. I mean, they are major issues. But the biggest issue will come later on, which I don't know whether they have really addressed that issue. Because from what I have heard from the water board, they are planning for even Colombo, they can't properly, I don't think they have enough water unless they create some reservoirs or something upstream. Even now there is a major issue during the dry season when the saline water comes up and the water supplies become saline. Even to the existing Colombo residents, they can't provide water. So I don't know how this port city is going to be handled. I hope they don't have a problem. So this is one of the major issues that we have in Sri Lanka, that they don't think about all those things before they. None of you are in the government service. So engineers don't join the government service. I don't blame you all anyway. So then the other issue is, I was talking about is water pollution. So as I told you now, pollution of water bodies is mainly from what we call non-point sources or sewerage. Non-point sources means point sources are what we call industries, right? So in Sri Lanka, you find that most of the pollution comes from sewerage and not from industrial effluents. There are some industries which discharge untreated waste even now. For example, rubber factories, etc. Especially in rural areas, they might discharge into the nearest river or lake or something, which can cause pollution. But generally, they are supposed to treat this waste up to certain standards. Now, the CE has gazetted certain standards. If an industry is discharging waste, how many people are working in industry here? Anyone working in an industry? So where do you all work with? Huh? Okay. Construction. Yeah, that's why there are so many apartments coming up. No? So anyway, now even industries, they are supposed to treat their waste up to a certain standard, right? So the CE has actually gazetted those standards. If you are discharging into a river or a lake, the wastewater has to meet certain standards. Now those standards are developed so that if you discharge that wastewater into a river according to those standards, there can be no pollution, right? So all industries are supposed to treat their waste up to that standard. But you find that some industries don't actually treat it properly, because it is also very expensive to treat waste, that is true, right? But you find that major industries in Sri Lanka, generally they treat their waste properly. And normally they discharge it into a river or lake or something like that. Which is okay as long as they're treating it properly. So this is why you find that most of the pollution in Sri Lanka is caused by sewage E. coli more than industrial waste. Now, if you are any of you are bathing in Mount Lavinia or Kinross or something, you'll be surprised to hear at one time of the year, if you look at the E. coli, the amount of E. coli in the Mount Lavinia seawater or in Kinross, it is very, very high. If people knew about this, if tourists are not near about the amount of E. coli there is in that seawater, no one will step into that sea. It's so badly polluted. Most of the people don't know it. Because what you find is that the sewerage from Colombo is being pumped into the sea without any kind of treatment. And with the currents, the pollutants have been washed into the beach. So people who are bathing, they are actually exposed to a lot of diseases because the body is highly polluted. Only at a certain time of the year, but at that time it's highly polluted. So pollution due to chemicals or industrial effluents is not widespread. So we are actually quite lucky in that sense that we don't have very high pollution rates. So how do you deal with this industrial waste I was talking about? So most of the time, now if it's in an industrial estate or something, it's very easy to deal with the industrial wastewater, no? Because you can put up one common treatment plant where all the industries can discharge their waste into that treatment plant, and then the treatment plant operator can treat that waste and then discharge it into the sea or something like that, right? So this is what has been done in Morotu and Ratmanana and also in Ekala and Jayala. Because the government found that there are many industries operating in Ekala and Jayala and in Morotu and Ratmanana. I told you, no? At one time they were establishing a lot of industries in that area. So what you found is that these industries, they didn't have enough room to put up their own treatment plants. There was no room in their industries, right? To put up their own, they had to, because the law says that they have to treat their wastewater. When the laws came in, when the regulations, CA put out their industrial, these effluent regulations in 1990, right? So now it's about almost 30 years ago, right? But we found that many of these industries wouldn't meet that standard because they could put up a treatment plant within their industry because there was no room in Ramani. Many of the industries didn't have room to put up treatment plant. And some of those industries don't have the funds to do it. So what the government did was they put up a common waste treatment plant in Mototo Ratmala, which is been run by the Water Supply and Drainage Board, right? So the industry can pay the Water Supply and Drainage Board and discharge their waste into the common waste treatment plant, and the water board will treat that wastewater up to the standards that are specified by the CA and then discharge into the sea. So that's what is happening now in Morutu and Ratmanani and also in Ekala and Jaya, the industry. So most of the industries, they will get their wastewater treated by the water board. And of course, they have to pay according to the amount of waste, their waste load that is being given to be treated. Then finally the treated waste is disposed of into the sea. So, but you might say that why do they dispose into the sea? You might think that the sea can get polluted. No, but it doesn't get polluted because they have to meet the standards that have been given by the CA. So if you are meeting those standards, the wastewater is finally meeting those standards after treatment, then of course there is no problem in discharging into the sea. Because in the sea, of course, you get a huge amount of water and the dilution is very high, right? So there is no pollution problem. Whereas when you take the sewerage in Colombo city, they collect the sewerage and just pump it into the sea, no treatment at all. they pump it about, of course, about 1.5 kilometers away, right? But the pipeline that is taking that 1.5 kilometers away is leaking and it's broken in many places. So that is why there is so much pollution actually. So it's not a laughing matter, it's a very serious matter actually. And it's only now, I think they are fixing those leaks and all that, and I think with ADB funding or something, they are actually doing up the waste treatment, facility. So after that, of course, there won't be so much pollution. But right now, there is quite a lot of pollution in these areas that people be. Any questions? Comments? Nothing. So now the other issue that I was talking about is the human-elephant conflict. So this is also becoming a major issue in Sri Lanka, right? And the reason for the human-elephant conflict is, of course, but unplanned development. Right? When we plan these huge projects, large-scale development projects, they are built over they don't consider that there are elephants in this area. So these projects are sometimes built on elephant corridors where the elephants are passing to and fro all the time. So then naturally there is a human-elephant conflict, right? So always now the Department of Wildlife Conservation is blamed for this human-elephant conflict. But actually it's not their fault. It's the fault of other agencies which are doing these development projects, which are there including into the encroaching into elephant areas. So this is the reason for the human-elephant conflict. Now we'll also just talk a little bit about the CEA and the regulatory function. I told you that in 1988, the National Environmental Act's amendment to make CEA into a regulatory agency, right? So the CEA has actually focused its attention on two main regulatory functions, right? The first regulatory procedure is what we call the Environmental Impact Assessment Procedure, EIA. And the second one is the Environmental Protection License Procedure for Waste Discharging Industries, or EPA procedure. So these are the two major regulatory procedures under the National Environmental Act. Now, how many of you have heard about the EIA? Environmental Impact Assessment. Have you all heard about it? All of you? Okay. So, Environmental Impact Assessment or EIA is one of the most powerful tools in operationalizing the concept of sustainable development. Right? So, it's actually what we call a planning tool which can go a long way in ensuring a sustainable development process. Right? So all major infrastructure projects as well as major development projects now require an EIA prior to implementation, because there is a lot of EIA in Sri Lanka. Environmental Impact Assessment regulation there is under the National Environmental Act. So all major projects have to undergo what we call an EIA. Now most of you said that you are in the construction industry, no? So now if you are in the construction industry, if it's a major construction, you know that you have to go through a EIA for a major construction project, right? When you say major construction project, there are projects like ports and airports, some large-scale industries, hotels. Of course, they have to be large-scale things for it to undergo EIA. Small-scale things don't need to undergo EIA. So, what do you do in an EIA? Yes.
Necessary
It's not. It's not dependent on the cost actually. It's not the cost of the project that is the criteria. The criteria is the impact of the project on the environment. So there might be a really high cost project, but if it has no impact on the environment, then they don't need to undergo any EIA. So if you want to know whether your particular project needs an EIA, you have to go to the EIA. There's a gazette notification under the National Environmental Act, right? And then in that gazette notification, you will see the kind of projects that need EIA. So it doesn't have anything to do with the cost, right? So those projects have been selected due to the impact of the environment, not the cost.
And you say that in previous time,
Yeah.
it is a powerful tool.
Yeah.
It's a really powerful tool, but the recommendation mentioned in the EIA is really considered in the medical community.
But it's considered.
In major projects like in our part, there is an EIA is not on the location. But still they are continuing the
No. The first EIA was rejected. No? The first site was rejected.
even that second one also they say that there is a zone near that Alu and
No, the thing is this. No, it's not. The first one was near the buffer zone, close to the buffer zone. Second one is not, because the first one they rejected through the EIA. Now, if there was no EIA at all, they would have gone with the project. No. So this is why I say EIA is a tool. It is through the EIA that they realized that it was going to be harmful to the environment. That's why they rejected the first one. And they didn't do the project. So this is why I say, because of the EIA only, they rejected that project. Otherwise, that project would have just gone ahead, no? Whether it affects the environment or not. So that is why I said, I mean, through the EIA, you can not do projects which are harmful to the environment. That is why I say it's a powerful tool for operationalizing sustainable development. Now, even the Mattala airport, many people are saying that Mattala is not the ideal place for airport. That may be true, right? But there was an even worse site selected before Mattala, right? Which was the Veeravilla airport, right? They selected a site in Veeravilla where they wanted to put this airport. And the site in Veeravilla is the most inappropriate site for an airport. It was surrounded by 3 bird sanctuaries. Right? 3 bird sanctuaries. So now, even on the impact on the environment, it's not even safe for the to have an airport, because with so many birds flying, there can be accidents where the airplane hits those birds. I don't know whether you all remember about 5 years ago in New York or something. There was an airplane which was where both engines failed, because they had hit a flock of birds when they were flying into the New York airport, right? And both engines failed at the same time. And the pilots had to land the plane in the river, in the Hudson River or something, right? But because he was such a skilled pilot, he managed to save the airplane and all the people in that airplane. But what I am saying is, we are trying to put airports in the middle of 3 bird sanctuaries, where you get thousands of birds flying in at a certain time. There are migratory birds flying in at a certain time. This is why I say this is very bad planning in Sri Lanka. Because I was there in the CE at the time that they selected this Veeravilla airport site, right? And everyone knew it was a very bad place to put up this airport, right? But I remember there were people in engineers, of course. I'm sorry to say, there were engineers in the airport, or whoever, these people who were putting that airport. I remember I asked them, why are you putting this airport in a place like this? And the chief engineer told me, so that is his answer. I mean, I was amazed. This is a senior engineer who told me this. මට කිව්වා මේක දාන්න කියලා මම දැම්මා. I mean, is that a way of professional? I mean, I was really amazed that an engineer of this caliber would talk like that, you know. It may be true that the minister, I don't know, prime minister or president, I don't know who has somebody powerful had told him, of course. But that doesn't mean as an engineer he has to just follow orders. No, that's why he's an engineer and a professional. So this is what you have to be as professionals. You don't just do what politicians tell you. I mean, in the private sector you don't have that issue. But definitely in the government sector you do have that issue. But then you are not expected to just blindly do whatever they tell you to do, because you are supposed to be a professional and you are supposed to advise them, right? If that site is not suitable, what he should have done is told that whoever that minister, I don't know, whoever it was that told him, to tell him, because this is not, I mean, there is a way of saying, of course, to a politician, you know, you can't tell at a public meeting, this site, we can't put it because blah, blah, blah. But there is a way and place and a way of saying to a politician. And I have found that if you tell a politician, this thing of blaming politicians for everything, I don't accept. Because Sri Lankan people always say that the politicians are the ones who are destroying this country. In my opinion, it's the professional people who are destroying this country, not the politicians. Because the politicians are not educated people, no? But do our professionals advise them properly? No. I have seen so many government servants, they never open their mouth and tell that minister or whoever, don't do this because this will happen. Because I have found that if you tell them the true facts, they will never ignore you because they are too scared. But that doesn't happen in Sri Lanka. This is what I put the total blame on professionals in Sri Lanka. All these things that are, most of these things that are happening. Because they don't give their input as professionals. So now, I mean, I'm just deviating, but so the Veeravilla airport, in the middle of 3 bird sanctuaries, then in the middle of, they had spent some millions of rupees on some agricultural project. There was a paddy or something like that, right? And that area was being used for that irrigation project. So they had found this particular place to put that airport in Veeravilla. And it was only at the stage of the EIA report that they realized that this Veeravilla site is not a good site because of the EIA. Otherwise, they would have gone ahead and so this is why I say EIA is a very good tool for sustainable development. Mattala, I wouldn't say it's 100% suitable. That is true. It's not. But definitely it's better than Veeravilla. Mattala is also bad. I agree. But then you can't reject all the sites that they bring, no? So you have to compromise somewhere, no? So that is what actually happened in Mattala. Mattala is not the best site. That is true. I agree. So this is why I say EIA can go along because, and part of the problem is that when they plan these projects, they don't look at these issues. For example, now there are some government agencies which are planning huge, irrigation projects, so many projects. And I know even now recently there was a World Bank funded project, right? Where they are trying to put flood bunds along the Kalani River to prevent the floods from affecting Colombo and the area, right? Now we think that when the World Bank comes and does a project, it's a perfect project now, right? But for some, they had done the feasibility and they were really about to put those flood bunds. Then they decided that because the World Bank has a lot of safeguard things, they said you have to do a SC, a strategic environmental assessment for this project before you start the project. Even before the EIA, they wanted what you call a strategic environmental assessment. So there was a strategic environmental assessment done, and at that point, actually I was involved in that we found that there was hydrologist in that team, and he said if you put these flood bunds like this, all the way up to, I mean, they were going to put the flood bunds from the river mouth up to Hanwell, right? And now even in the feasibility studies, they had not studied it, that they found that if you put these flood bunds, there would be a backwater or something going right up to areas which are never flooded before, about 2 meters, going to be flooded in areas which are never flooded before, right? So now if you didn't do that SCA, they would have just gone ahead with the project. And you would have found that, I mean, it would have been a disaster. So when they found out that issue, at least they are trying to find some kind of solution for that. So this is why I say that EIA is a way of operationalizing sustainable development. Because I have seen, I mean, it's not perfect. I won't say it's perfect at all. I mean, there are many flaws in that process. But at least to some extent, it looks into issues. And now, as I told you, in Sri Lanka, they don't plan projects properly. They put industrial estates where there's no water. So many projects like that. And it's only when it comes to the EIA process, they look at all these issues. So only because they have to get the approval from the CEA. And the CEA has to pull out all these issues, and then only they know if they have water for this industrial estate. Or if they are building a reservoir, or the forest, conservation forest is going underwater. They haven't even considered that earlier. So it is only because of the EIA process that those issues are coming up. If we didn't have that process, none of those issues would have, they would have just gone ahead and implemented all those projects. So this is why I am convinced that the EIA, though people blame the EIA process, I mean, a lot of people scold the EIA process saying that it's a very complicated process, it's delaying the projects, it's a retarding development, so many complaints against the EIA. But finally, what I would think is that it gives us a better kind of development. Yeah, to some extent, you have thought about other issues other than just development. I mean, there is no point developing a country if you are going to lose all the environment at the end of it. No? What is the point of this development? I mean, we are talking development. So, this one now, when I see all these apartment complexes coming up in Colombo, I don't know. Some people might be happy to see all these high-rise buildings coming up, but I think very unhappy actually. Because are we going to be like Singapore? Is that going to be our example? We are always saying Singapore is the most wonderful country. To me, that is really not. I find Colombo much more. I mean, we have such a natural city. I mean, when you go to Singapore, you find that everything is so artificial. There is nothing natural there. Whereas here, I mean, it's a chaotic. I mean, Colombo is chaotic, definitely, but you find that it's more natural. Even the wetlands that we have. And we will value those once all those things are gone, definitely. You can see in highly developed countries now, in London and all, they are trying to put artificial wetlands, spending billions of pounds in London and even in other cities, because they have destroyed whatever natural areas that they have had. So what are we doing now? We are trying to follow Singapore, or we think that it's wonderful to have high-rise buildings, concrete jungle like that. We think that's what we should be. No, I don't know. To me, that is not. I mean, I think Colombo is I mean, there are many laws in our city, but I don't think that's something to follow. I don't know. This is my personal opinion. That I don't know. Others may be thinking like that. So anyway, what I was trying to say is that EIA does help in planning actually better projects. It has flaws, a lot of flaws also, but finally it gives a better project at the end. So this is what I was trying to tell you. So the purpose of an EIA is to ensure that development plans or projects under consideration are environmentally sound and sustainable, and that environmental consequences are recognized and taken into account early in the project design. Now that is the important thing, early in the project design. You have to consider those impacts before you implement that project, right? So now just compare what has happened in Moratuwa Rappalani, where there's an industrial zone there, unplanned industrial zone, right? And the problems that is causing. There's asbestos industry right next to a house, a battery factory operating there. That is unplanned development. There are houses all around the asbestos factory, right? There are textile industry discharging colored water into the drains. That is unplanned development, no EIA. But now if you see an industrial estate, right, they will have to undergo an environmental impact assessment. And you will see that those industrial zones are highly planned, very nicely planned. They have waste treatment plants, they have all the necessary infrastructure to ensure that there won't be any pollution in these industries are operating. So this is why I say this is the purpose of an EIA, to ensure that there won't be huge impact. I mean, no project, you can never do a project without any impact on the environment, right? So that we have to realize that there will be some impact on the environment, but what we are trying to do is minimize that impact to the minimum. That is the purpose of an EIA. So the history of EIA in Sri Lanka, actually the environmental impact assessment first came in the Coast Conservation Department Act, not in the National Environmental Act, right? It was first brought in the Coast Conservation Act, and projects which are happening in the coastal zone had to undergo environmental impact assessment. Then it was later that this provision was brought through the National Environmental Act. And now, of course, this law will apply to projects all over the country, right? So now this is one of the questions that people ask: does every project require an EIA? Right? So the answer to this is that every project does not require an EIA. Right? Only so-called prescribed projects require an EIA. Now there was a question whether the cost of the project is what determines the EIA. No, it's not the cost of the project. There's a list of what we call prescribed project. If you want the gazette number, it's gazette number 772/22. It's dated 24/6/93. Right? If you look at that gazette notification, you can find the kind of projects that need EIA. Right? So generally there are kind of 31, total of 31 projects which are listed as requiring EIA. Those are major large-scale projects like airports, harbors, expressways, that kind of project, right? And in addition to that, or even hotel projects, so hotel over 100 rooms will definitely need a EIA, right? But you also find another part to that EIA regulation that even a small project, if it is situated in what we call an environmentally sensitive area, then even if it's a small project, it will need an environmental impact assessment, right? So generally a hotel which has more than 100 rooms will need an EIA. But if that hotel is situated in what we call a environmentally sensitive area, then even if the hotel has 15 rooms, it has to undergo EIA. So it's very difficult to just often say whether your project will need an EIA or not. You have to best way is to check with the CEA whether your project will need an EIA or not. That's the best way to ensure that you abide by the law. So this is of course the EIA decision making. I don't think you need that. So the purpose of an EIA is really not to reject a project, but to plan a better project. Especially in countries like Sri Lanka, where the planning process is very weak and they don't plan projects properly. I think the EIA process is very helpful in planning this project. So I don't think. So this was, I think, projects in Sri Lanka, right? So projects in Sri Lanka are politically driven. Most of the projects, right? They are done because some politician wants to do it, right? And there are many instances where proper feasibility studies are not done prior to implementation of major projects. This is also true. If you look at a project that is going to cost billions of dollars or something, you are supposed to do a feasibility study for that project. You can't just go and dump millions and millions of dollars into a project without seeing whether the project is feasible. But in Sri Lanka, sometimes these feasibility studies are not done actually. So in instances like that, the EIA procedure becomes part of the feasibility study. It's only during the EIA process that you see whether this project is feasible or not. So this is not actually acceptable because the EIA is not supposed to look at the feasibility of a project. EIA is there to look at whether the project is sustainable. This is the actual situation in Sri Lanka when some projects are concerned. Because they are most of the time driven by politicians. So nobody dares to tell that politician, you can't do this project like this. I have seen so many examples of industrial estates with no water anywhere. Not a drop of water anywhere even to drink for the people. But there's an industrial estate. Then there was this, the world's biggest sulfuric acid factory. There was some Indian company which was trying to bring the world's biggest sulfuric acid manufacturing industry to Sri Lanka. And the Ministry of Industries was trying to give a site next to a housing, Ranavilu housing project. The Ranavilu housing project is here and the world's biggest sulfuric acid factory is here. Right? Now that should never happen. No, I mean, now, so it's only at the EIA stage and the CE had to reject that project, which is really bad. That project should have, I mean, you don't need to reject the project, but he should have been given a better sign. Because you don't need an EIA to tell you that you can't put the world's biggest sulfuric packet next to a housing complex, no? I mean, anyone, even an 8th standard child will know that. So, but this, the minister, I mean, I can't even who was handling it, but they waited till the EIA report for the CA to reject this project. And then Indian man, he was spending his money coming up and down to Sri Lanka, I don't know how many times. For about 1 year, he was coming up and down and wasting his money. And finally, the project was rejected. That is not proper planning here. And as I told you, Veeravilla Airport in the middle of a bird sanctuary. That site should never have been selected, even to think of an airport. Then there was another project, which is also what you call a shipwreck. There was also politicians behind this at that time, right? They were trying to bring a what we call a shipbreaking industry. Now, if you all have heard about shipbreaking industries, it's one of the most dirtiest industries in the world, where they break up old ships, right? And it causes massive pollution in the coastal areas. And this kind of industry has been done only in Vietnam and Bangladesh, and even those countries are now not doing that because there is so much pollution due to shipbreaking. There was a proposal at one time to bring a shipbreaking industry to Trincomalee Bay area. And if you look at the Trincomalee Bay, it's one of the most sensitive and the most unique bays in the world actually. Not only in terms of ecology, but even otherwise. It's one of the most unique bays that you find in there. So if you put a shipbreaking industry there, what will happen? In Sri Lanka, I mean, it was because of the CEA, they rejected, they didn't do EIA or anything, fortunately. But the CEA had to reject it, right? So all of the above projects should have been rejected long before the EIA process. Why should it go through EIA? You know, just looking at it, then you can't proceed with this industry. But in Sri Lanka, they wait for the EIA to say no. So this is what I call bad planning in Sri Lanka. So I think that I will stop here. If you have any questions or comments, I'll answer them. Comments or anything. Questions? No. Everyone must be tired. So if there are no questions, I will stop here. My throat is also hurting. Unless you want to say something. So we can stop here. No questions? How many questions do you get about the environment? One? One question in your paper. Do you know? Yes. Huh? What is waste disposal? What disposal for? Arvakalu. My idea is, of course, why are we taking that waste so far? That's the problem issue that I have. I mean, if you can dispose of it somewhere close by, because the cost is going to be huge, no, of the transport cost, taking it to Putlam. Why do you ask? What do you think? Protect. Of course, this is the thing now. In Sri Lanka, of course, they will protest at anything, no, even a good project, they will protest. So the protests, you can't take it. I mean, naturally, they don't like waste from Colombo to be brought into Putlam. That syndrome is there in Sri Lanka. They say, not in my backyard. That's a famous syndrome, NIMBY syndrome. Nobody wants somebody else's waste in their backyard. That is a famous, so just because they are protesting, it's very difficult because you have to find somewhere to dispose of that waste. It has to be either Putlam or, it has to be, the problem is that in Colombo, it's very difficult to find any areas for disposal. No? There isn't any land available. So that is why I think they have found the area in Putlam. So I have no issue with the site or once they make the sanitary landfill site, because when you make a sanitary landfill site, actually the pollution is minimized. They put liners at the bottom so that the pollution doesn't go into the soil or the water, etc. Right? So that way, when you look at it, it's a good project because there will be a sanitary landfill site. The issue that I have is why are they transporting it to such a distance? Because the transport cost is might become unbearable after some time. Because if the waste disposal is going to cost so much, many of the municipalities will find it that they can't bear the cost. So my issue is the cost actually, not the way that is going to be disposed of. I think they are good projects because you need sanitary landfill somewhere. For what? You mean in Putlam? Here? Yeah, so if you are putting up a sanitary landfill anywhere, right, there is no danger, there is no pollution. So right now, what we are trying to do is improve the situation from what it is today. Today, if you look at the situation today, what are we doing? We are just dumping the waste on the ground, right? All the groundwater is getting polluted, the soil is getting polluted. Then animals are coming and spreading the waste all over. Is that a better situation? No. You are trying to make that situation better by the problem in Sri Lanka is no one has seen a proper sanitary landfill site. So if they actually taken to see a sanitary landfill site, they say we want one in our area. Because actually if you look at a proper sanitary, it's like a park. If you go to South Korea, and they have in South Korea where in the Seoul, they have the biggest sanitary landfill site. Seoul is a huge city, about 10 times bigger than us. But if you go there, it's like a beautiful park because they have grown flowers on one side. And you can't say that it's a waste disposal site. So my idea is that definitely we need a sanitary landfill site. Whether people protest or not, you have to select some site, if it is not Putlam, it has to be somewhere else. So it has to come. Wherever you go, you will get protest. That also I know. Definitely they will protest because they don't know what they are getting.
Politicians, superseding politicians
Definitely the politicians also have a role. I mean, they should know the law, but someone has to tell them. No, that's what I am trying to tell. Nobody tells them. I'm not saying that they are very good and they are not. I agree that they are awful, but that's a different matter. What I'm trying to say is they don't get the proper advice most of the time. Because if you advise them properly, they won't do those illegal things most of the time. Most politicians are like that because what I know about them is they are too scared. They are if an educated or engineer or somebody tells them, this is what will happen if you do this. They are scared to take that risk because they know that they'll be in trouble. They don't want to lose their votes, no, but nobody tells them. Most of the time, nobody tells them. Why is it that they changed the decision not to put the Veeravilla airport? Because they were told that it is not, so they didn't go ahead. It was the president's project at that time, right? Now he had all the powers to do what he wanted. He didn't have to change. But when they are told that this is not a good place to put an airport, then they get scared because they think, my God, I can't make this mistake because it's bad for them. So this, I think the professionals have a very, very big role in that, really, in Sri Lanka. Which doesn't, to me, in my experience, that is, I see the problem as that, not because we have created a system where the politician, he becomes the big shot, who's dictating terms. But we have allowed that, no? We have allowed that. That's the problem. Why did we allow it? Of course, there are some politicians who won't listen to anybody, I agree. I mean, there are some people who are impossible. And then, of course, sometimes you think these government servants, I mean, they are scared that they lose their job. No, I mean, most of the time they are scared. So that is why they don't oppose the politicians. But generally, they are not going to do anything to you. That much also I know. They won't do anything to you just because you said something. They will have some respect for you. Secretly even. They might show that they don't like you or, they might ignore you, but they'll have some secret respect for you because you have spoken your mind and at least told them what the truth is. So to me, that is the biggest problem in Sri Lanka because we keep blaming the politicians. I don't think so. To me, I find it's more the professional people who don't properly do their job. I mean, I'm talking to the experiences that I have seen, but I mean, there may be other experiences. I have heard of cases where they have lost their jobs, but almost lost their jobs because, they tried to give some advice. But what you have to remember is when you're talking to a politician, there's a time and a place to do it. You can't do it in public, in a public meeting. You can't tell a politician, sir, you can't do this is wrong, that kind of, you have to know how to talk to them and how to tell them that. That I suppose most people don't know how to do it. But I think the problem is mostly with professionals. Not only engineers, I'm talking about all professionals. Not only engineers. But Veeravilla Airport, I had my personal experience that's why I related with you. In that case, they should have actually advised that this is not the best place for leaving alone the environmental issue. That was not the best place for the airport anyway. So people who are dealing with the airports should have told that minister, this is not the best location to put this airport because of these reasons. And I'm sure they would have listened. I mean, they listened, finally. Of course, they tried to show that the decision they had made because the farmers were complaining, etc. They made some political mileage out of that. But we don't care now what they do. But finally, they didn't do it because they were too scared. Because that is because they got the right information. So this is what doesn't happen most of the time. We don't know. Any other comments? So people get annoyed when I say that I blame the professionals and not the politicians. Because to my mind, they are politicians. No, I mean, they are not educated. Most of the time, they are not educated. How much education do they have? Do they know all this? I mean, do they know what an engineer will know? Do they know what a university graduate will know? No. They are just politicians trying to get some votes. I mean, so that is their interest. But so it is up to IT care. There's a huge role for the professional in that, that they have to do their role. But I know some people have told me when I told this, I think last time when I told them, they said, when you try to tell them, the people who are appointed as chairman or, the big shots in the agency, right? They are not politicians, but they are the politicians' people, right? So those people can create problems for you. That is true. That I agree. They can create problems for you. But are we going to keep our mouth shut just because they are going to create problems? No, I don't think we should. Because at some point in your life, you will realize that you have done the right thing. You can be happy about it. You can see all these disasters happening in all these projects. Now, why did the Umaoya project fail? I mean, there was a huge disaster with the Umaoya because there was no. There also the feasibility study was not properly done, right? And even in the EIA report, they had said for them to do a lot of more geological studies, etc., which they had not done. So which is, and of course there was some problem with the contractors, I think. Contractor also they didn't do the job properly. So can create disasters. So you can stop there. Questions after that.
These questions I have except for the exam last September. This environment has not come. Let's not happy in the paper.
And no question at all. Really? Why is that? I don't know because I don't get the question.
Yes.
Somebody else is setting the question. Hello? Right? Why is it then Bas is not there? You would have locked it over on the back door then. Right? I don't know, I didn't, because he's there, I didn't do it. I'm coming now. So they didn't have a question?
Yeah, environment is a very, we are expected.
Yeah.
This question will come because environment is a
Yes.
very.
So they didn't have one?
No, we are disappointed.
Really? I don't know what happened. Because actually I am not involved in the setting of the questions. So I don't know what they do.
Setting of the questions, yes. But you are stopped in, there are some parts.
Yeah, some those are not really relevant. If you want, you can take this thing.
But in your examination point of view, is before.
This is enough, I think.
Is enough. Landfill side.
Yeah, because they don't ask very. I think in the exam they ask more general knowledge things. Yeah. General knowledge. Yeah. They don't ask from these lectures.
Yes, yes.
Where are you working?
I'm working in construction company,
Maga. Yeah. Construction, but they are very environmentally conscious, no? Maga?
Maga, yes, but we have to. Method statement, no? Method statement, we need to enclose the risk assessment. Environmental assessment. What is the assessment, for example, excavation?
Yes.
What is the environmental risk will available and how to remedy?
You have to do those things.
Yes,
no?
those things. Yeah.
Yeah.
Before prior to commence the each construction activity. But, can I email for you?
Yeah.
Answer.
Ramani, what answer?
Any answers to
Questions?
the answers? Yes. And your opinion.
Okay. Yeah. Ramani Ellepola, RAMANI. N-I. Ellepola. ELLE.
ELL.
Yes. E. another E, P-O-L-A, at gmail.com.
P-O-L-A, no? W?
Ramani Ellepola, right.
At Gmail.
At gmail.com. Yeah, you can send it. What's your name, please?
No.
No. Yeah, you can send her. Reply.
No?
Yeah.
Thanks.
Okay.